Good afternoon, everyone. Today's presenter of experiences with battery storage with solar and standalone is Andrew Reilly. He's the Director of Planning and Environmental Services at Wendel Companies based in Buffalo, New York. You can send in your questions during the presentation and they will be answered at the end. Drew?
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon to everybody. We're ready to start. I'm going to do a quick overview. If you've read what we're going to be talking about today, basically we're seeing a lot of increase in energy or battery storage systems in Western New York and throughout the country, but we're going to talk about Western New York. We're going to talk about the types of systems that could be proposed in your community or installed in your community. We're then going to talk about the New York State model law, which gives you some guidance to how to put laws together to regulate them. Remember, this is New York State. You can regulate uses in New York State. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about my experiences, giving some stories of specific projects, so you learned and some lesson learned about those projects. And then, of course, talk about answer some of the questions you may have. This is more focused on regulatory than technical. With that said, introducing myself, Drew Reilly, I'm an environmental engineer and a planner. I'm not an attorney, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I'm not a code enforcement official or officer. I work for a company called Wendel. We're a full service design company with about 280 people. We have offices on the East Coast and in the central part of the country, and I think we have one office on the West Coast. Again, I want to repeat, just so I'm not giving anybody legal advice here, even though we're talking about laws. And again, from a technical standpoint, if you have technical questions about batteries, we have people here that can discuss, electrical engineers, et cetera. But I'm going to focus on the regulatory end as a permitting person and a person who deals with local laws and ordinances. I just talked a little bit about myself. I have worked with municipalities. That's bulk of my work. Over 35 years with municipalities. I understand the seeker process. I'm an expert in seeker, and I've created some battery storage laws. I've been involved in Article 10. Those were the large-scale solar and wind projects, and I'm getting acquainted with Article 90, the 94C process. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences. I've had experience with solar and battery projects, large-scale battery projects, battery storage projects that have gone in after wind projects have gone in. I've written and amended the laws pertaining to those, and we've actually processed projects through these codes. So I kind of see how these laws have worked and how they haven't worked. So our presentation today is broken down into what we just talked about, my experiences. We're going to talk about, the next part of this agenda is going to talk about the types of battery storage systems. Then we're going to talk about how the municipalities can regulate, and a little bit about the 94C process. Within that, I'm going to give those examples that I talked about, that you can see specific things that have occurred in communities and how communities have dealt with these issues. It is a growing and expanding market. So one of the things we like doing when we're doing a presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole from my office. We'd like to find out who's in the audience and a little bit about your community, so I can, when I get to certain parts of the presentation, I can stress more of them. So anyway, go ahead, Nicole. We have our first question about if you have the ability, you can answer these questions that are coming up on your screen, and we'll get kind of results to them. Nicole, let me know how we're going on responses to these questions.
Sure, we got about 50% in. I'll give it another few seconds.
Okay.
Looks like we probably have a majority. I'll go ahead and share.
Okay. So we have a majority of planning board members, some town board members, some ZBA officials, a code official, and we have other officials. So thank you. So we have a lot of planning board and ZBA members. Go to the next question, Nicole. There we go.
Give it a few more seconds. Looks like we have a majority in. I'll go ahead and share.
Okay, so no, most of you have not. A couple of people have had a project and some have some pending. So that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the next question. You're still coming in. Okay, I think we got a majority.
Okay. Most of you do not have. That's good while you're attending this presentation today. All right, we'll go to our last question and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. I should have had an other one under here, but
This one took a little bit longer to read, so it's taking another few seconds. I'll give it one more sec here.
okay, zoning, safety, and approval process. Good. Okay. Thank you very much for your help, Nicole.
Sure thing.
All right. And back to our presentation. Let's move to the next slide. Oops. Control back. Not moving forward.
Just have to click back into your presentation since I was launching.
Okay. Right. Not coming back to me.
What's that?
I don't have control back.
Click in presentation?
Is that,
Like click in the presentation?
okay. There we go. All right. That's good. We don't want to have any glitches. All right. Storage of energy. Okay, it's becoming a very important part of our world today. I don't know if you all saw this weekend, there was actually an article in the newspaper, in the Buffalo News, if you get the Buffalo News, on energy storage. And they actually quoted it as being one of the top 5 technologies that's going to help with the future economic boom in the area. So either you're excited about the fact that it's going to cause an economic boom, that there's going to be lots of, or you're concerned, and we're going to talk about later, of all the battery storage that's going to be coming in this country and in our region. And by the way, there's all different types of battery storage. I mean, there's lithium ion, there's lead acid based batteries, there's some I've never heard of. Nickel cadmium is your standard one, nickel metal hydride. There are flow batteries. Don't ask me what flow batteries are. We can talk to an electrical engineer about that. And then there's other types. So there's all different types of battery storage out there. And by the way, there's also coming other methodologies to store energy. Hydrogen fuel cells have been in the news lately, and those are going to be used in vehicles and other things too. So those things are coming. To give you an idea, and there's a lot on the screen, but I got this off of NYSERDA's website, which is New York State Office for Energy. To give you an idea, and I think you're all aware of it, they're planning 6,000 megawatts of solar by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts of energy storage. So that's the amount of storage that's going to be added to the system. I won't read what their goals are. Their goals are to get carbon-free electricity. but it's going to be a key goal to their meeting their requirements. So the storage is going to help integrate that clean energy into the grid and shave peaks and have storage to help with those peak conditions that are occurring online and the outages that occurred. We heard about the outages in Texas, et cetera. So they're talking about adding energy storage, and that's going to be on a small scale and on a large scale. We're going to talk about all those different levels of systems that are going in, and a lot of them are, well, most of them are private systems. So that gives you kind of a background of where we are with energy storage. We're here to talk about how do we regulate these. So, and when you try to regulate anything, and you know, when you have zoning codes, et cetera, you first have to describe what you're trying to regulate. So what are we trying to regulate here, and how can we regulate those? So there's different types of battery storage systems, installations. I think they're based on scale too. You have a residential grade system, which we're going to talk about. You have a commercial grade that can be inside a building and outside of a building. You have larger scale systems. We're going to talk more about all these in the next couple slides, but you have some larger scale systems that are used to help businesses and other uses, and et cetera. And then you have very large scale systems that are producing power to sell to the grid or store that power in the grid. So that's what's happening. You also have, and I forgot the last one is, you have battery storage associated with the renewable energy project. They don't have to be associated specifically with a renewable energy project, but if you had a large scale solar or wind project in your community or seen them, sometimes they have the battery storage incorporated right into their project. It's not a separate, doesn't come along later, it's actually incorporated into their project. So those are, we're going to talk about these different scale types or types of installations you're going to see. So the first one is the residential use systems. And for all, I think we have one code enforcement officer on the line. This can be used to help with energy usage. It can be used as an emergency backup. I heard that in the future, instead of having at my house, instead of having a generator, I could have a battery system there that would switch over when power outages occur. I think the most important thing to understand here is that for these systems and all the systems, there's been a new section of the New York State Building Code that was added in, I believe, in 2019, and the code enforcement officers, the building inspectors, got training in 2020. So there is new building code, and I won't have it here. It's a 42-page document that's entitled, you can look for it. It says the 2019 Energy Storage System Supplement is published by the New York State Department of State. For those code enforcement officials or anybody want to read, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but this has all the changes that occurred in the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code as it relates to energy storage systems. These are quite extensive, and you'll need to know that because probably under your local law, I'm guessing that for these residential grade systems where someone wants to put it in at their house, in their garage, or et cetera, they're probably going to do it under just a building permit. I'm assuming most towns that I've worked with have done a battery storage law, have done it as just requiring a building permit. Now, you could have a special building permit application for that, and obviously the code enforcement officer is going to have to review those applications. But again, those are typically done under a building permit. But it's your law, you can create any process for those. But right now we're seeing those as typically building permits. I'll make sure I'm caught up on my notes here. All right, the next grade is similar to the residential grade, the commercial use system. So if I'm a business in your community and I want to do this type of system at my business, I can have those installed inside the building, and there's rules and regulations about that, and I can have those installed outside the building. So again, these are accessory uses. They are typically regulated through the building permit process. They have to meet those fire and building codes that we talked about, but you can regulate them through some sort of approval process as your community. If you believe they reach a level, for example, I think if they're put outside the building, do you want to regulate those even though they're accessory uses? You could do that through a site plan approval process. I've seen some communities say, well, we would like them to appear before a planning board to take a look at the location, how they're being located on the property, et cetera. And then once they receive that site plan approval, then go to the building inspector for the building permit associated with that. So again, you can regulate these through just building codes, or you can regulate them through site plan approval. I would probably recommend if they were outdoor units of a certain size, you may want to go through a site plan approval process. That's up to your community. You know how you deal with stuff in your community. Next grade, and there's a couple slides on this. These can be, and this is where I'm going to talk about some of the samples and ones that I've dealt with. These are the little larger systems. These are utility grade. These can be, as I said before, associated with a planned solar or wind project. They can come after a solar and wind project, and I'm going to talk about one specific example or solar wind project. They can be an independent system constructed to store energy to sell to the grid. I might as well tell that story now. A couple of the communities I've worked with, we've had developers come in who just want to build an energy storage system, a battery storage system in the community as a primary use on the property or as an additional use on the property. But the sheer purpose of that is they essentially buy power when it's cheap and then sell it back to the grid where they can make money off of that. So it can be an independent system. You can have, the next bullet, you can have systems, and I'm going to give an example of that are put in to help local problems to a grid. You know, you have problems in a grid where there's brownouts and blackouts. You could see these systems used in those regulations. And then the last one is the really large projects under 94C. That's that new regulation for the larger energy projects over 25 megawatts. We're going to talk about that later in the presentation. But let's talk about some of those specific utility grade and where I've seen some projects. First of all, my experience of dealing with the small projects, the solar projects that you're seeing all over, and I'm sure many of the communities online have seen the smaller 5 megawatt approximately or less solar projects coming in. Most of those do not have battery storage associated with them that I've seen, but they can have. Someone could propose a 5 megawatt project in your community with battery storage component. So that is, you can have that also. We're going to talk about how you can deal with that later. I've also seen them proposed in Article 10 projects as part of a large-scale Article 10 project. They have battery storage proposed with the project. So I'm going to give a couple examples. This was an interesting one in the town of Orangeville, New York. They have wind turbines that have been developed down there. Those are existing. They had a company come in to put in at a later date this past year to put in a battery storage system. I think the size was in Orangeville, I think I have notes here, about a 20 megawatt system. And because it was a 20 megawatt system, whether you had it in your law or not, they processed it under their existing laws. So it went to the planning board for approvals, went through the process of approvals for that. To give you an order of magnitude, because I was learning this, what do we mean by a 20 megawatt for this type of project they were doing in Orangeville? A 20 megawatt project was done with 15 containers. These are containers that they buy of battery units. And each of those containers was about 18 feet by 40 feet in length. So to give you an attitude, so those 15 containers were placed on a 10-acre parcel, but they only occupied about an acre of the land. But it occupied, those 18 containers with setbacks, et cetera, occupied about about 1 acre of the 10-acre site. That went through all the approval processes and is in the process, I believe, has received approvals and is in the process, I believe, of being constructed in the near future. So that one was a fit back into a system that you already had wind energy project down there. The next one we saw I'd like to talk about is in Java. That was a real interesting one. Basically, in Java, New York, they're at the end of the power system down there, and they have a lot of brownouts and blackouts in that area. I think they average over 100 or more brownouts a year in the town of Java, and they had blackout conditions. So my understanding, under that regulatory process, typically the power company that exists in that area would come in and say, we need to fix this system, do something to fix this system. Now, PSC, the Public Service Commission, now requires these power companies to look at alternative solutions. In other words, they can be green energy solutions. So in the case of Java, they went out to bid, the power company went out to bid to solicit groups to find out a solution to the problem. And the winning bid was to do a combined solar and battery storage system to help solve those problems. And that system was I think it consisted of about 7 megawatts of battery storage and about 1 megawatt of solar. So in other words, they were going to generate energy in the solar, put those energy into 2 battery storage systems. They had 2 separate systems. Again, this is not my expertise, but the understanding is one of the systems was a lead acid based system of batteries, which were longer term for the blackout conditions in the community. And then the lithium ion batteries, which were in a separate installation on the site, they were they could help with the shorter term brownout conditions that existed in the community. So here you had a project that they were proposing. The utility company let a private company say, here's how we're going to solve this problem. The private company can make money off of this. And they won the bid, and they were going to bid this project and do this project. Under the town's zoning ordinance, we agreed that they had to come before the planning board. It wasn't a large enough project that would fit under any Article 10 or 94C project. So they had to appear before the planning board there to get approvals for that project. Went through a site plan approval process, and I believe there was a special use permit granted for it. They went through and they did seeker on that project, and ended up in the long run, I won't get into all the details I could use up, ended up getting approval for that project. My understanding is, I had a report recently on this project, even though it was approved as a solar project and a battery storage project, is my understanding that the project has been converted into basically a battery storage project, where they took out the solar component of the project, and they're basically going to buy that power from the grid in low demand times at the cheaper rates, store that power in the lithium ion and in the lead acid based batteries, and then when in times of needs for brownout or blackout conditions, these battery storage units would then help in those conditions. Again, the town had a lot of concerns about this and wanted to make sure it was constructed correctly. And again, for the last bullet on this slide, I did talk about those just specific developers wanting to put in battery storage in your community to make money, to basically buy power and then sell the power back to the grid. So we are seeing those. The next part is what we were here to talk about, which is the solar, is about the actual laws that you can use to regulate battery storage systems. But as a note to that bottom one there, we've had proposals from different entities to do these in different towns that I work with. And a couple of towns determined, basically looking at their existing zoning ordinance, that would not be allowed as a primary use on the property. They did not see it fitting into the zoning ordinance and told the applicant it wasn't allowed in their community. So that kind of leads into our next slide, which is the primary purpose of today's presentation, is talking about you as a municipality being able to regulate battery energy storage. As part of that, New York State, and I applaud them, NYSERDA actually has a draft model law that we can make available to people, and you can go on NYSERDA's website, just search it, and you can see a battery energy system model law. It's a great model law. I'm going to try and see if I can use my technology well here. I'm going to call up the link for this model law and kind of go through it. You can see that it represents kind of a good outline for you as a community to develop your own local law. I'm assuming everybody can see that very well. Sharice came up well. Thank you. All right.
I don't know.
All right. So this is the battery energy storage model law that NYSERDA has. I give credits to them for that. There's also solar model laws and other model laws they can provide. So they walk you through, they give you an overview on how to use the model law. If you've never used one of their model laws, gives you an update. But let's get to the actual model law. I think the model law, and you'll work with your town attorney and others, but the model law has the statutory requirements where what is the authority you have to regulate. This is a land use. You have the authority as a New York State community to regulate land uses within your community. So there's the authority to regulate. In any good law that you create, you want a statement of purpose. What is the community trying to do in regulating battery storage within your community? NYSERDA has given you examples here that you want to provide regulatory scheme, you want to do other things. But again, you can make your own statement of purpose using this. Any good law, and NYSERDA has very good examples, you want good definitions of how you're defining stuff. And one of the most important definitions, and we talked about that in the introduction, is also defining the different types of systems that could go in your community. So the next section of your law is applicability, how it's going to apply, what it's going to apply to in your community. And then there'll be some general requirements about the needs for building permits and electrical permits. You're also going to then give authority. What is the process? You're going to give authority to a planning board or others if they're going to be involved in site plans or special use permits. You have to grant that authority to that review board. And then there's a section about referring to the uniform code and the energy code, et cetera. You can have that. And again, you can build upon these general requirements. You're going to have permitting requirements for that tier 1 system. It could be as simple as what's in this law, which is basically they are exempt from site plan review, and all they have to do is come in and get a building permit for such. Again, you can establish what you want. If you wanted them coming in for certain levels of tier 1, depending upon how you define them, you could have them coming in for site plan review. Just because NYSERDA says here that they would be exempt, you could have things that wouldn't be exempt. Their tier 2, they give an example of tier 2, and again, how they define what tier 2 is. You have to look at how they're defining it. They will then say, okay, this is the process. In this case, they're saying that it would be reviewed by a code enforcement officer. It would be then subject to some reviewal process with a reviewal board, like a planning board. You can establish the criteria for that. You could also have a special use permit for that. They also have some other general requirements: signage, lighting, vegetation and tree cutting, noise. There are noise issues you have to deal with these laws. Even down to decommissioning, you want these systems removed afterwards. So again, they talk about a decommissioning fund to be set up. And I think if you've dealt with solar installations, you've dealt with these issues too. They also have in their model law, well, if you're going to require site plan approval for certain projects, and again, you can define them differently. You can have requirements for that site plan application. So what are you going to ask them to submit? I would add this right into your law. Again, I'm going to step aside here. The battery solar law, if you define one yourself, you're going to have all those regulations in there. So you don't have to refer to your site plan requirements or other requirements. Try to have all your requirements in the law, or if you don't, say the site plan application will have to specifically meet the site plan requirements listed in this section of your code. But I would suggest, because these are very unique projects, you probably want unique requirements for site plan applications for those projects. So again, they give you samples here of all the things that should be submitted. even emergency operations plans, et cetera. I think NYSERDA does a very good job here of giving you a very good list of things that could be considered in your battery storage law. Now, the next level is some of these projects, obviously the larger projects, whether you categorize them as tier 3 or tier 4 or certain tier 2 ones, you may require a special use permit. So again, you're going to put standards in there for what the requirements are for special use permit. I believe my professional opinion on this one is that I think this is where probably NYSERDA just gave you really basic requirements, setbacks, height, fencing, and screening and visibility. This is where the communities, knowing their local issues and concerns, may want to add some other things to this law. I think this is where typically I always recommend in my communities that this is where you can get into real good standards that relate to your community and what issues you want to deal with. So we'll talk about that later, but I think in their law, I think you would really want to expand upon this section. Then they have the ownership changes, how you're going to deal with a lot of these systems get sold, how are you going to deal with that process of ownership changes, safety issues, permit time frame and abandonment. Well, how do you know when it's been abandoned and they have to decommission it, set up, criteria for that. Then with any good law, you're going to have an enforcement section of the law. And then again, all laws should have a severability section. And the severability section says if for some reason one part of this law is ruled that is by a judge or someone that it's not enforceable or something, that it doesn't make the rest of your law worthless, that basically that clause would be removed and the rest of the law would still be fine. Talk to your attorneys again. I'm not an attorney on that, but severability clauses are extremely important. So let's go back to the presentation. That's NYSERDA's kind of draft model law that you can use to help develop a local law. So back to, we talked about the New York State model law. We talked about definitions, do a lot of, try to use some of what's in my presentation and what's in the model law, defining those different systems within your community and how you're going to, what processes you're going to use, what bulk requirements, you guys always deal with that, setback requirements, et cetera, things like that. We talked about submittal requirements. And again, I think I'm going to stress, and I have a couple slides coming up, is talk about those unique issues that are specific to your community. And then there's the required sections of the law, which we talked about. All right, I'm doing pretty good time-wise. I'm okay on this. So for these larger scale, I'm going to focus on the larger scale systems. I think those systems that are the residential grade I talked about, or a business doing a small one inside the building, those are pretty straightforward, and you will probably make them fall under your building permit process. Maybe the smaller ones outside may require site plan approval, but definitely for these larger scale installations, whether they're private systems for existing businesses in your community or standalone uses, you want to have good rules and regulations about those standalone systems. So you want to determine where you're going to allow them. Remember, we're in New York State. If you can say that systems over a certain size, and I would do it, by the way, I always recommend in writing these laws that not deal with the issue of the megawatts of the project. What do communities regulate? They regulate size and magnitude of projects and uses. So deal with the type of system and the size and magnitude of that system. I would not get into the whether it's a 20 megawatt system or 1 megawatt system. What are the things that affect your community? If you have a system that is larger than 5,000 square feet, you could have different requirements for it. Those are the systems that could have greater impacts. Again, the next bullet here is you're going to establish the processes and the procedures for all those different type of systems. You may want to limit sizes in certain areas. There are certain areas that you don't want to see certain size systems. Again, you have that power to do that and have reasoning and logic for that. We've talked about the bulk zoning requirements, all those things that communities typically add to their zoning laws, which are setbacks, height restrictions, et cetera. Other technical requirements, electric, fire safety, et cetera. One of the things we've seen in all the projects, and I think most communities do this, for a project like this, you want to refer to your fire department, other people that are going to deal with situations, emergency situations at the site. So get their input on those, not only their input on the actual law, on the projects, but to get input on the law. How would you like to deal with those? Access ways, et cetera, you know, roadway entrances, emergency means of egress, fencing, things like that, that local standards or local conditions may warrant your fire department giving you advice on those things. The next section of the law is construction requirements, bonds, insurances, et cetera. Those things we talked about, the removal, decommissioning bonds. Get your town attorney involved in that. Make sure those requirements are clearly articulated in your law. And then, after you get a project, the attorneys are helping you make sure that those bonds and insurances, et cetera, are done properly and you have that protection. And if you were to get a large-scale system, you want to make sure that it's going to be decommissioned and removed when it's not in use anymore. Interesting side bit is that you can have, we're suggesting, like solar projects, you can have host community agreements, you can have pilots associated with these projects. We've seen that in a couple of projects that have gone forward, is that the community has either negotiated a host community agreement, which you can include in your law, requirement for that. In a zoning law, you can't put specific standards about pilots or anything like that in a zoning law, but you would work with your assessor or your department that deals with that, and you could have a deal with the issue of pilots and how you would deal with the issue of pilots when it comes to a energy storage system within your community. They do pay taxes, or they can have a payment in lieu of taxes, or like I said, a host community agreement associated with that. So those are some of the issues, some of the more specific issues. I repeat some stuff, but just these are the most important things that should be in your battery storage law. Fire safety issues, setbacks, noise. There should be some standards. Whether you have a local noise ordinance, you can set it in the requirement or ask them to submit noise studies as part of this. Screening and aesthetics, always very important, especially depending upon the location of the area, that is screened properly, and the aesthetics of the site match what's in that area that you're going to allow these in. Emergency operations we talked about. Operation and maintenance plan, I forgot to bring that up. That should be a component of your law, is making sure that they're submitting an operation and maintenance plan, and one is approved and made part of your special use permit. If that's the way you're going, how are they going to operate and maintain this so that you maintain access to it, et cetera, that it doesn't become an eyesore. And then there's those post-construction issues we talked about, decommissioning, pilots, et cetera, inspections. You could have a yearly inspection fee, et cetera, things like that. It's not on this slide, but you also want to set up, I would recommend, a separate fee structure application for this. If you're going to have a separate law for battery storage, have a separate section, have a separate requirement for application fees. Don't be your standard site plan application fee. Have a special fee for that, or special use permit fee, because you may have to hire someone to help you review more complicated things within that application. So have that as a requirement, that fees be paid to help you with those reviews. Again, those issues of uniqueness to your community, different types where you can restrict them in certain zoning. Again, setting up the approval process. Unique issues. Are you an agrarian community, a lot of farmland? Do you have some hamlets with historic structures? What are the things that you're most concerned about in your community? And I always leave this one with, it's New York State, it's home rule. This is kind of introduces the next side. It's home rule. You're allowed to regulate these things. But with that said, and I want to make sure we have, as you know, and most of the people probably on this presentation are well aware of what were referred to previously as Article 10 projects, which were large-scale energy projects typically over 25 megawatts in size, fell under the Article 10 process. If you're familiar with Article 10, you're also very familiar with the fact that New York State now has promulgated the new 94C regulations. I believe they came out not last week, but the week before. So there are new 94C regulations, which are going to regulate energy projects within the state of New York that are 25 megawatts or some criteria for 20 megawatts, but essentially for 25 megawatts or more. And the 94C regulations do include battery storage systems. So my understanding, and again, I'm here to say there are no experts on the new process yet, that these will probably fall under, anything over 25 megawatts will fall under 94C. But let's step back. This slide is about Article 10. So my understanding is that if you have an Article 10 solar project in your area, solar or wind project in your area, kind of like what happened in Orangeville, if someone comes along at a later date to put in a battery storage project, my understanding is, and again, seek legal advice on this, my understanding is if the project is over 25 megawatts, it would then probably switch over to the 94C process and not fall under Article 10, it would be under 94C. If it's less than, like in Orangeville, if it's, say, someone's proposing a 15 megawatt or 18 megawatt battery storage system in your community that's supposedly going to service a large-scale Article 10 project, my experience and my understanding is that would fall under local regulatory processes. So like in Orangeville, that fell under local regulatory approvals, even though it was associated with an Article 10 project. So, and the last slide is about the 94C, which I mentioned about that these regulations are in place as of 3/2. The Office of Renewable Energy Siting is responsible for this process. One of the things I want to talk about in this new 94C process, as I mentioned, it does include battery storage projects. But my recommendation for whether it's a battery storage project, whether it's a solar project, et cetera, even if they fall under the 94C process, which says they don't need any local regulatory approvals, they go through a process. But under the 94C process, whether it's solar or battery storage projects, they have to consider local zoning and planning in the development of that project. Can they get it overruled? Yes, there's a process where they can submit to the state of New York with their application and say that your requirements are overly burdensome or they're arbitrary, et cetera, or whatever. They can overrule them. But what I've been telling the communities and other people representing communities, attorneys, et cetera, have been saying, you should have a good law in place, even though you may think, well, this law is going to be overridden by the Office of Renewable Energy Siting if they're doing a 94C process. They have to refer to your law. They have to consider their law. They have to prove that the requirements of your law are overly burdensome. If you have a requirement for screening or buffering that is reasonable and makes sense, even though it's a 94C project, the applicant should try to meet that local zoning because they want your support. They don't want to go to New York State and say to the ORS that the Office of Renewable Energy Siting we don't want to meet this requirement. They want to say we're meeting this requirement. So put your regulations in place. It's going to affect all those ones that are not 94C, but if they are 94C, they do have to come in early and look at your laws and consider that. Hopefully they'll make their projects try to conform to your local law and work with that because they want your support. They want to go to the state and say, look, we've considered, we believe these things we can accomplish and meet the requirements of your zoning law. So you all are aware that under 94C, it does mandate timeframes for approval. So it's going to be a much quicker process. So have your laws in place so you can deal with these projects when they come in. So I believe I have, and 15 minutes early. I can talk on some other things, but do we have some questions? Sarah, do we have any questions that have come in on this before I can talk about a couple other things? I want to make sure I get to the questions.
Yes, we have one question is what should a county planning board look for during review and approval?
County Planning Board? Was that, I'm sorry, was that County Planning Board?
Yes.
Okay, so again, any projects that is not 94C, so you have a battery storage project, someone wants to do an 18 megawatt, 15 megawatt project, battery storage project in your community, it's subject to local approvals and local zoning. So first thing they're going to do is they're going to go to your zoning law and say, can I do this project? Okay, you have a local solar law, a local battery law. You're going to look at that, can I propose this? They're going to propose that project, whether it requires site plan or special use permit approval in your community. And as you know, under the 239 referral laws is that if the project, the location of this solar project, so I keep calling it solar, I did a solar presentation a couple weeks ago, this battery storage project, if it meets the requirements to be referred to a county planning board, there are requirements within a certain distance of a state or county road, parks, etc. It has to be referred to that county planning board. So the county planning board is going to review it as they review other projects that they look at the enabling legislation that gives the county planning boards their function says that these are the things that we review that are regional impacts to a community, agricultural impacts, impacts to important regional resources, impacts to adjoining communities, the typical things. So they are very important. The county planning board will do their job of reviewing that project. If it is subject to referral under 239, they will review it and give recommendation to the local planning board or town board, who's ever doing that approval, whether it's site plan or special use permit. So they do have the same powers that they do for other projects, as long as it's not 94C. 94C, county planning boards, I don't quite know. I know they can provide comment, but I don't believe there's any specific requirements under the 94C process for county planning board input. The other thing I want to talk about, in that process, you're going to refer to the county planning board, and I'll do my job as a seeker expert. One of the most important tools, along with hopefully your new battery storage law, is the seeker process. These projects are subject to seeker, and you will use that to deal with. You can help, the county planning board gives input, other agencies give input, and you look at all those topics and weigh and balance those and have to make a seeker decision. I always tell planning boards, just because something may not have been mentioned in your battery storage law, if it's part of the criteria, going through part 2 of, say, the full environmental assessment form, if it's part of the criteria in the full EAF, those are questions that you can ask. Even if it's missed in the law, you can ask those things related to seeker. And seeker touch bases on just about all the issues that probably would be concerned in a community, from public health and safety to community aesthetic impacts. All those things are in seeker. So it is your other very powerful tool to use in reviewing these projects, along with those inputs from county planning board and other agencies. Sarah, do we have another question? It looks like one popped up.
Yes. Will there be a unified battery permit similar to solar?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Will there be a unified battery permit similar to solar?
I believe they are working on something like that, if they do not have that already, and I apologize for not knowing that. I should know that, and I do not. I know the uniform one done for solar application was a very good permit that a lot of communities adopted and revised and whatever. But I can check, or I'll just call up NYSERDA and ask if they have something like that, or the Department of State maybe has generated something like that. But that's an excellent question. It's probably something I should look into, because that's something that the local communities are going to want to need then for their building permit applications. If they don't want to just use their standard building permit, it would be good to have something that you can refer to the sections of the energy storage system supplement and make sure that you're reviewing these properly and making, I've already dealt with several building inspectors who are uncomfortable in reviewing some of these applications, especially when they are larger type systems being put in buildings. Again, not my expertise, but when they're inside the buildings, they are very concerned about interpreting the codes and how these units can be put inside buildings. So, excellent question. All right. Is that it on the questions?
There is one more. Can we get an
Okay.
email of this? Oh, I can do that. Okay. Yes, you can get an email of the slides presented. And we have another one. Have you had any involvement with fuel cell energy storage?
Fuel cell energy. I assume they're talking, I'm familiar with hydrogen fuel cells. I am working with the town of Alabama. We've seen in the paper that there's a company that is proposing to build a hydrogen generation facility and then also a fuel cell facility in Monroe County. My understanding is those, at least for now, that's not my expertise for now, those fuel cells are going in trucks, forklifts, other equipment and whatever. I have not seen large outdoor fuel cell systems, so I don't have experience with those, but I assume, and I shouldn't always assume, that maybe they could be covered under your battery storage law, that you could have a separate section. But I will, excellent question, I will ask NYSERDA and others involved in that, is that if that could be incorporated into a battery storage law, and are there issues that you want to regulate actual fuel cells, which are similar to batteries, they're storing energy. I just have not seen them in a larger scale installation. I've only seen them for actually manufacture and then use in trucks and other pieces of equipment as smaller fuel cells. Right? I don't know but I'll look into that one, and Sarah, I will get you, at least if we're going to supplement and say, here's some things we found out for people that are inquiring about things that I don't have an answer for.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right.
Don't have any more questions at this time?
All right. So again, I'll just do a summary then. Basically, the summary is I would strongly advise, take a look at that model law. Sarah, if you don't have, we'll get you a copy. So if they request them from you, but you can also get it from the NYSERDA website, get a copy of that model law, take a look at, how you would like to regulate these potential systems in your community, because they are coming. Residential grade, commercial grade, and then the more utility grade are probably coming to your community in the near future. They are going to, my understanding is they're going to replace a lot of the emergency generator systems. So you're going to see them pop up. And then, of course, as I said in my earlier slide, New York State needs lots of energy storage within in the system in the next 5 years. So there are going to be a lot of it constructed within New York State to store that energy because of its intermittent nature of it at this time. So that is my closing. I give people an extra 6-7 minutes.
We have a couple of thank you for your presentation and your time from the registrants.
Thank you.
And so I could get a copy of the model law at NYSERDA?
Yeah, I will send it to you. I can send it to you in a PDF form, but they can also reach out to NYSERDA. And NYSERDA can help too. NYSERDA or consultants like myself, NYSERDA has people that can help you work on that law. That's one of their jobs. They're supposed to be helping municipal governments prepare for these types of systems. So you can have people like myself, attorneys, NYSERDA help you, but that model law does give a very good outline for a law that can be created within your community.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Drew. I appreciate your time, and it was a good presentation.
All right, and thank everybody. If anybody needs to reach out to me specifically, they can let you know through Southern Tier West, and I can respond to them if they have any questions or other issues. All right? Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day, everybody.